Hello, and welcome to week 2 of Star Trek Sundays. I'm Victoria, and with me is my co host T. Today we're going to be discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. At the top of the room, we have pinned the Star Trek Sundays link tree, which lists the episodes covering this theme that we'll reference today. Thank you, T, for curating a collection of episodes for us to revisit. Star Trek Sundays is a passion project for T and me and forms part of a new YouTube channel which will post highlights from conversations on Clubhouse. Once again, it was a pleasure revisiting these episodes. Several moments really hit me on my rewatch, and I can't wait for this discussion, truly. Before I turn this over to T, I just want to say we will be inviting people up to the stage. We'll just let T do his introduction. And then perhaps a summary of what will happen, and then we'll invite people up. And I do want to say I've had lots of questions in the back channel about whether you have to be a true Star Trek fan to participate. No, absolutely not. We do have topics we want to discuss, and we're discussing them through the lens of Star Trek. But if you haven't seen the episode and you have some thoughts on the actual topic, please feel free to share them. So once again, thank you for your time, and I'll turn the mic over to T.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, the topic of gender is actually dealt with surprisingly often in Star Trek, which is why I'm excited to discuss it today. I should probably mention that when I say gender, I mean role as it relates to your sex concerning your outward appearance. And by sex, I mean some genetic disposition as it relates to your biology. The topic is interesting because Star Trek has several episodes in which they discuss alien races where such concepts would be entirely foreign. So I think it'll make for a lively discussion on the topic. Normally, I wouldn't host a room on gender, as it's a topic I don't know how to make interesting, so we can have a good discussion about it. And it's more likely to get someone upset at you for saying the wrong thing. But when we view it through the eyes of Star Trek, suddenly it becomes a subject that I'm comfortable discussing. Because now, instead of being something that I have to be completely politically correct about, we can just discuss what we saw on the TV and relax our political stance on the matter. You know, right or wrong, fiction gives us an opportunity to ask these types of hard questions without having an agenda of our own. And Star Trek, I think, was woke before the word was used to describe it. I'm going to try and make that case today in terms of showing you the summaries of the episodes and some of the quotes that I think highlight the awareness of the gender issues that were present even back in the 80s and 90s. And I think that they were very much ahead of their time in terms of discussing these really hard questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Victoria, and I'm really excited about this episode.
Thanks, T. Yeah, I have to agree. The writers were woke before anyone really used the word, and before that became a word that was almost used in a negative way. So just to recap, this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And I'll be bringing people up on stage to share your thoughts in a few minutes. T, let's start with the offspring. Can you provide a summary of the episode, just to remind those who didn't get a chance to review it? And then I have a few questions about that particular episode. We'll start there. You can answer the questions, and then we'll invite a few people up.
Yeah, The Offspring was definitely one of my favorites. Season 3, episode 16, originally aired on March 12th, 1990. So this is back when, you know, these types of discussions were not quite being had in the media yet. Data successfully creates a new android, which he views as his child. However, the magnitude of his accomplishments quickly attract the scrutiny of Starfleet, who wants to separate the child from Data and the Enterprise for study. Matters are complicated further when the child begins to develop beyond Data's abilities. I chose this episode because Lal, the child, has to choose her outward appearance, and the list of available options is wide open to her. So she could have been a male Klingon if she wanted to, but she chose to be a human female instead. I felt the overacting of Lal was overshadowed by the alarm of the alarm that the Federation took to what Data thought was what everyone else was already doing, which was making a child. And they tried to control, and they tried to exert control over him and his child, as if it was their call to make, while Data wanted to take the opposite route and let Lal choose her own path. I think there were some incredible quotes from this, like Picard saying, "You're seeking to achieve what only your own creator has been able to achieve, to make another functioning sentient android." And Data replied, "That is why I must attempt this, sir." He was saying that he had to because this is his lineage. And Lal asked some great questions like, Father, why am I me instead of someone else? What a question. At the end, she said, "Thank you for my life." That's how she said goodbye to Data. And at one point, Data was challenged on his ability to be a parent, and he shot back, regarding the Admiral and his first child. "I'm forced to wonder how much experience he had as a parent when his first child was born." And that hit me. That was a moment where I was like, yeah, you're shooting back with good arguments here. This is good stuff, right?
Yeah, I loved this, and you just reminded me. I when I was rewatching it, I hadn't seen it since its original airing, and I keep forgetting the ends of some of these shows, and that it doesn't just wrap up neatly. So there's some of these I was like, "What? What happens? Why do they have to say goodbye?" Like it was, it can become emotional, even though it's the acting isn't completely superb in some of these shows, but they, yeah, it was really good. So well, let's start with, should genders apply to anything that presents as playing some sex-based role, including androids? And where is the line between gendered and non-gendered? Was Lal androgynous when she was, quote, born, end quote, and then became female? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's fluid regarding how outward appearances occur. Because in the beginning, I saw Lal as androgynous. I did not see, I did not see them as a him or her. I saw them as having, potentially features of both and or neither, right? In that they were humanoid, but they didn't necessarily possess human parts in the right areas, and they didn't have. They had a voice that could be either female or male. And then when they went to choose, right, you saw them as a male Klingon, and of course it was a he. You would walk up to him and go, "Well, that's him," right? Um, but instead, she chose that female, and so this is the role that she chose for herself. And now she is female in my mind, and I called her a her. I think that this extends to anything that we sort of see as gendered. I think people gender their cars, they gender their computers and things like that, right? They can really, it's anything that if you put enough clothing and makeup on a mannequin, you'll gender the mannequin. I think it's one of those things where anytime that something plays that outward appearance, it can certainly have that gender assignment in our colloquial speech, even if it isn't one of the cases that we have, like, sort of a strict assignment of sex there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of this, yeah, part of what I was feeling when I was watching some of these was how freeing it seemed before somebody had to choose which gender to be, and why does it have to be that way? It is funny because my husband often questions me because I will gender inanimate objects and go, "Look at that little guy." He's like, "Why is it a guy?" And then I have to go, "Yeah, what was it about it that I said guy instead of girl or something like that. And I don't know if we're wired or conditioned. So that's another topic. I'm going to invite a few people up on stage. I don't see any hands yet, but I'm hoping that a few people will accept the invite, and then and we can just talk generally. I'm really interested to know where the line is between gender and non-gendered and androgynous type of things. So anybody who wants to come up can put their hand up, and then we'll just sort of go through it in PTR order. So I'll just do a little reset for people who are new to the room. This is the Star Trek Sundays room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse. And we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And the topic we're discussing right now is through the episode The Offspring. And my question to you, Sean, is where's the line between gendered and non-gendered? Was Lal androgynous and then became a female? You can answer that or make your comments about the episode in general.
Thanks for having me up here today. When I watched this, which was quite a long time ago, was that like 92 or something, 93? I forget. I always 90. Okay. I always assumed she was a female and that was his daughter. And people didn't know how to relate to her. Having a female android suddenly on board out of nowhere. I thought that was interesting. And I mean, was she sexual? I don't think so, but I always equated her as female. Cars that I have owned, I have tried to figure out whether they are male or female. Sometimes I'm sure they're male, and sometimes I'm sure they're female, and other times I'm not. So maybe they're them or androgynous or both. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion for my cars and boats and an airplane, ultralight things that I've owned in my past. So I thought this was a tearjerker episode. This is one of my favorite episodes of Next Generation because it pulls in a lot of emotions. And at the time, my kids were young, and it was just difficult to see her leave. I thought, wow, this is great. And it was just in less than an hour, she's gone, So it was very sad to me.
Yeah, I found myself with feelings at the end as well. You've made me think about something, Sean, because her appearance was female, right? Like they didn't say you have to choose to be a girl. They were saying you have to choose an appearance of something. And that's interesting because, like you just said, she wasn't going to be in embodying everything that is female, but her appearance was going to be that, and that was how people were going to accept her. And for me, I want to sit with that for a little bit. T, did you have any response to Sean before we move on to Joshua?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Sean made a great comment, just incredible. And I would sort of want to address what you were saying, Victoria, because there's a quote from this I want to just read, in which Lal is having a conversation with Troy and Data, and Lal says gender female. Troy says, "That's right, Lal, just like me." Lal says gender male, points at Data. Data says correct. And Lal says, "I am gender neutral, inadequate." And I thought that was a faux pas. I thought that there was a moment there where I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. I get that we're trying to push towards a certain plot line where they pick an appearance, but of the thousands of different aliens, there had to have been, binars and other, genderless species in there, that would have been genderless and or gender neutral. And I don't think that the gender neutral inadequate was quite in line with the message that they were trying to send. I think they just made a faux pas in the writing there. So just wanted to call that out there.
Yeah, I mean, they're not, the writers are definitely not perfect or anything, but yeah. And obviously they had to get an actor or actress to play this part, so they chose a female. And I'm a guy watching at the time. I thought she was rather attractive, except for the fake wig, but I thought she was rather cute, and so I just equated her as being a female, at least in appearance, as far as that is concerned. So that was just my human reaction to this actress playing a android on television at the time.
I wonder, having watched this and the others, which are linked in the link tree above, why wasn't she allowed to choose Janai? Right, which are gender neutral. So that's really interesting. So this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And the topic we're on now is, where is the line between gendered and non-gendered? We're talking about the episode Offspring, the Offspring, and was Lal androgynous and then became female? My question is, was it just a facade, a veneer? I'm just going to move to Charlotte. I've shared spaces with Charlotte on this sort of topic before, and hopefully Charlotte will have something to add.
Yes, thank you. I especially appreciate the subject. I was on active duty in the Navy at the time, and I vaguely remember this episode. But is this perhaps the first mention that we know of, and not specifically in Star Trek, but in TV history in general, where there is such a character, where the exploration of that character's gender is in this particular subject. They're either neutral or they get to choose their gender. Because I don't recall another actor or another character in anything else prior to this. This is really the first one, and this is why I feel this was so impactful at the time and since. Does anyone know that?
I think you bring up a really interesting point, Charlotte, because I'm trying to think back. I know there were a lot of very, very, very popular episodes for different strokes, Three's Company, things of that nature that dealt with. Three's Company was the one that dealt with um, the gay lesbian situations the most. But they really did not cover any sort of like real gender issues. It was always sort of more of a comedy around, hiding the fact that Jack was gay, and that was it. And I don't think there was nothing on Punky Brewster. There was nothing on Belvedere. Nothing that I can recall. So I don't know if anybody else can recall anything, but I think you bring up a good point. This may have been a first for TV.
Yes, like the shows that were the heavy hitters, such as All in the Family. Well, they explored transvestism, drag queens, homosexuality, rape. Maud explored abortion, but I just don't recall this ever being explored in other TV programming other than this particular show. And that's why I think it was so impactful. And yet it kind of went to sleep for a while, you know. But I'd be curious as to how many people, thought about that. I've considered my own gender fluidity in just these recent years, and yet I've had so much exposure to TV in my lifetime. I'm 60 years of age, and I'm in a relationship with my wife. We've been together 30 years, and she's a TV watcher. I've been a TV watcher, but Yeah, I really think this is one of the first times. Thank you for that. Thank you for the hearts and the thumbs up. I appreciate it. So, and I appreciate the subject very much. It's something that I think is something that we are more aware of now than ever before. At least I am.
Yeah, I mean, you're
Yeah,
getting
thank you, Charlotte. Oh, go ahead, T.
hearts and thumbs up for your sharing, because that was awesome. The thing that comes to mind with the gender fluidity is the other thing, that the other faux pas that they made, was when they were talking about this in this very same quote. They said, "Whatever you choose will be yours for your lifetime. It's a decision that will affect how people interrelate with you." And I think that that was another faux pas. I think they didn't realize that, no, actually, she can. There's no reason that she can't. She can actually go ahead and choose a different appearance. If she could do it one time, she can do it a second time. There's no problem with that. So I think that was another faux pas there. I think that, that was another not quite thinking through the right message that they were trying to send.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for those quotes, T. That's great. Yeah, as Charlotte knows, and some of you know, I grew, I talk about this on occasion, but I was a teenager in the 80s, and there was a lot of androgyny, and I think that formed part of the reason why, as much as I identify as a sit het normative white female, um, I sometimes feel like the costume or whatever it is of femininity or of a woman, or having to just identify as that. I don't feel like I'm anything but that, but having to wear that feels like a burden sometimes. And so when I watch these shows, I feel like, oh man, it would be so good to just be genderless and have my sexuality be just private, because and that's part of why I just love Clubhouse. To go because I don't think we're seeing each other. Perhaps some are, but I don't think we're seeing each other as anybody but these brains and voices and stuff. And I find it quite refreshing. Um, so I just want to say that this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens, and we're talking about where the line is between gender and non-gendered and androgynous, and was this android androgynous, and then she became a female, and others about this particular other topics covered in The Offspring. Joshua, are you ready to have a little share?
I am, and hey, imagine that. My unmute option on my Clubhouse app is working now. It's amazing how when you turn things off and turn them back on again, they work. Yeah, before I mention any of the gender stuff, if I will, I will say that this is definitely one of my more favorite episodes, specifically Offspring. I didn't pre-watch before this particular Clubhouse room, but I have watched The Next Generation in its entirety, I think at least 3 times over now, I want to say. And for me, many of you know I'm blind. Those of you who know me, but if you look at my profile, it's not a shtick, it's part of my existence. At the time, it was really interesting for me. And there were some other things which I keep a little bit closer to the vest than my disability. But at the time that originally aired, or when I saw it, I still had quite a bit of eyesight, but I had already lost the vision in my right eye. I had very limited eyesight in my left eye. I felt frequently like an inconvenience because I didn't really fit into the blind world, and I didn't really fit into the sighted world quite so much, because just for a lot of reasons, just kind of where there wasn't a spectrum relevant to vision. So there was an aspect, though, when they were trying to tell Data, oh, you can't have this, is where law was an inconvenience. It was something different than what people were used to and were willing to accept and could wrap their brain around. And I recognize that the issue of gender and the issue of disability and acceptance and people's discomfort and ableism and all that sort of thing are different issues. There are some parallels, and certainly for me personally, um, the value of Lal's existence and the value of my existence. You know, I was born in '80, so at the original airing, I was 10 years old when I probably saw it, because I might have only seen it on a I was going to say a replay, on a rerun, just a couple years later, maybe early '90s still. You know, I was maybe middle school age, and for me personally, there was the be having something give voice, if in a way that I couldn't articulate very clearly, this sense of being valued by some, even if most people don't get it, was incredibly cathartic and meaningful for me. And it is stuff like that that transcends maybe the particular issue that's being directly addressed of the episode, but the kind of larger themes that are a little bit more universal, and for a lot of reasons. But that is one aspect of, in particular, Star Trek: The Next Generation, which I really um, was very meaningful for me over the years, in kind of having, like, hey, you know, not everybody's going to understand, but this is a thing, and then just recognizing that people have their prejudices and people have their, you're so angry at that one admiral when you're watching the episode, and you feel so much for Lal. But yeah, that, I think that whole kind of exploration of the value of life and the value of whether or not people fit into people's boxes and categories, and the discomfort with the less than commonplace or not so commonplace, was very meaningful. I don't know, relevant to the thing that T said about the faux pas, um, relevant to the discussion of gender. Uh, it could have been that, and I would actually want to go back and rewatch the episode. We all know from the first season, those of us who are hard Star Trek fans, the the episode in which Lieutenant Yar had to it's like the weird matriarchal society kind of thing, but it was really handled a little bit cringy, relevant to the role of men and women. I can't remember the episode. Maybe T can pipe up. It's the one where I think there was a male leader who was attracted to Yar, and so somehow she was supposed to fight his wife, but he didn't have any land. I don't remember specifics. But all that to say, yes, they're human. But also, when I remembered watching that episode, and maybe, and I'm almost done, I wonder if I'll have the same response. The way her you talking about it is not so much that they made a faux pas, which they could have, but also that the sheer enormity of that type of a decision, even if there is the potential, which they didn't explore, for her to change it again, um, that's still, I would imagine, a very overwhelming proposition to decide how people are going to perceive you, relevant to how you might feel yourself. And I think I'll end there for now.
Thank you for that, Joshua. I really appreciate your contribution. T, did you have a response to Joshua before we move on?
Yeah, two things. First of all, the Code of Honor was season 1, episode 4, and one of the really cool episodes, because in my mind, they were simply paying homage to the original episodes, the TOS episodes. Um, uh, because of the fight scene. I mean, even the da 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 da. It was very much, just in that style, and doing the fight with the cheesy swinging at each other and missing, and it was great. The other thing that I wanted to respond to was that, yeah, the admiral in the scene where he was saying that, we're just going to take Lal and take her away from Data, and Data's like, what do you mean? Right? You were so angry at the admiral that whole episode, and I thank you for bringing that up, because I thought that was one of the another thing there, that we could just do a whole episode around, was sort of, how much right does the Federation have over those types of things, because I think there's a number of episodes in which the Federation, sort of tries to exert its might there, and sort of gets, reared back in, as it were. So
Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to move on. We're still on The Offspring. This is the Star Trek Sundays room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And we're discussing the episode The Offspring, and where is the line between gendered and non-gendered? Was Lal, which was Data's child, which she, androgynous to begin with, and then became a female. Steve, thank you for your patience, and wondering what your thoughts are on this episode.
Yeah, so I wanted to point out some things to do with what's happening in our universe and in our reality around the time that these things are being written. Um, the I think we all kind of know there's always been a trend of the more quirky types of people getting involved for whatever reason in entertainment, and you just always have a lot of interesting perspectives that, especially back in those times, wouldn't be allowed even so much to be portrayed on television, because it was not representative of the majority. So there'd always just be this insecurity to like believe that the people would be accepting of any kind of challenge to their thought. But when Gene Roddenberry, was able to make his breakthroughs with his writing in Star Trek the original series, that kind of put a finger on it, that like, no, you could get away with quite a lot within this community because they're very quirky fans in general, right?
Right, right, exactly. Oh, that's great. Thank you for that, Steve. I really appreciate that contribution. We do have a couple of other episodes to discuss, but I didn't want to leave Stu hanging. Stu, were you going to discuss this generally, or did you have something to say about this particular episode and Lull? Because if we kind of like to break it into episode discussion, so do you want to chime in now or wait for the next
Oh,
episode?
I was going to chime in on this one. Was my
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Was my mic on earlier when I popped up on the stage? Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So, so this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy
Oh,
full
yeah.
of aliens.
Yep.
And this will be the last. Yeah. So this will be the last, or for now until we head to popcorn. The last contribution on The Offspring, and then we'll move on to the host.
Sure.
So, Stuart, what did you have to say on this?
Yeah. I vaguely remember this episode as well. I haven't had a chance to catch up with all the episodes, but I'd really like to, because I really want to get my TNG game. It's one of my bucket lists, is to go through TNG on Netflix. I used to feel sorry for Data and how people would get so impatient with him, or with the character, because I imagine that someone who, like Data, could be insufferable in some ways in a social context, or someone who was just either naive or just really socially inept by the fact he was learning. He was an android. But in this particular one, I thought it was interesting. Going to what Steve said, the other reason that they choose humanoid characters is because, unfortunately, science fiction has always looked through an anthropomorphic lens. So, because we're talking about it's generally all about the human experience, and it's about human emotions, human ethics, human politics. Because we can only speak about that through a human lens. So, I think a lot, apart from the special effects and stuff like that, the other reason I think is just because that's where it started from a practical sense. With shows like Doctor Who and Lost in Space and all those other shows. is that it's far more easier to relate to an alien character that is humanoid than it is, say, to a gelatinous mass. It's like a Seth Rogen made a joke of that in The Orville, or say a big crystalline structure that's made of silicon. Because we're so used to recognizing faces, so there's that immediately facial recognition, and we can empathize more with the character if they look human rather if they're just a sort of mass of rocks. It's going to be harder for us to empathize, or even animal, even if it's animalistic, because we're used to seeing animals in the real world. So if we get animal traits, we can kind of feel like this with pets. And yeah, my first exposure to interesting things about gender issues is that back in the 90s and 80s, in the 90s at high school, I was going through my high school. I was going through a bit of a sci-fi book binge, the classics. But then I went on to a book called The Forever War, which was written by a gentleman. It mostly was an interstellar war book, but it focused also a lot on the alienation a gentleman faced, and it was basically his retelling of his experience returning from the Vietnam War, how he couldn't survive in society. But there was this interesting part is because they're using a faster than light travel, they keep experiencing time dilation when they go off and fight these battles against this alien and return. So even though they've been on tour for 4 or 5 years, it's like 50 to 80 years has passed by on Earth. And so the first time they come back, apparently they come back to Earth, and apparently there was this massive resource war, and that they basically human government became oligarchy, where everything was divided by class and status. And on top of that, due to overpopulation, the Earth had adopted embraced homosexuality, and that the genders seem to be more mixed, where feminine people who identified as women or female tended to be more masculine, and masculine from a gender. So, it was written in the 70s, so it kind of had sort of a twang of a bit of homophobia in there. But it was more about how this gentleman couldn't relate, how it was so alien to him to come to a world where homosexuality was a norm, where heterosexuality was shunned. It was just seen as a social taboo. It was kind of not like illegal, but it was just seen as, why would you do that? You're basically creating another human life when the world is starving and the world's in resource decline. So he had to deal with that. Obviously, that's why he went back to the war, because he couldn't relate to real life. But that really made me start thinking, like, what would the future be like? Like, would gender become fluid? Would we not recognize gender the same way we do? And I think when we talk about Lol and the android, that when he was looking about appearance, whether that's just intentional or unintentional, it did raise some interesting points that they spoke only about the appearance, not about woman or female or man. It's like, what do you want to look like? Yeah, so I'm not sure. It's an interesting point of view. I did like the episode. I kind of got frustrated with how everyone was so impatient with Lol, because they couldn't just explain to Lol, look, you're in a classroom now, so you got to act like these children aren't going to be as intelligent as you. But it's a TV show. I always used to get frustrated with how impatient everybody was with Data. But they're a Navy ship; they've got a job to do, I guess. So they can't babysit these guys all the time. But yeah, I just want to say, it is an interesting thing to talk about, and thinking about this does remind me of the first time I read that book, and I was exposed to this. It really opened my eyes to thinking about gender, and it's not just binary. Who knows what people may think of gender in the future.
Great. Thanks for that, Stu. That's wonderful. T, did you have any comments on that before we move on to the next one? Because that kind of leads us into the next episode as well.
No, I think it's good to move on.
Okay. I couldn't quite hear you at that point, so I don't know if you're having trouble with your mic, but I'll just do the reset, and then we can move on to the next episode and a summary by T. So this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse. We're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And the next topic is going to be discussed through the episode called The Host. So T, why don't you give us a little bit of a summary of that? And then I've got some questions regarding that episode too, which I think this one was just this one is a big one for me. So if you could go ahead with the summary, that would be great.
Yeah, I think this one was a big one for me too. The host was season 4, episode 23, originally aired on 5/13/1991, so a year later, in which a Trill ambassador is on board to mediate a dispute and falls in love with Dr. Crusher. When the Trill host is killed, the symbiote has to be temporarily joined to Commander Riker to continue the negotiations and the affair with Dr. Crusher. Now, I chose this episode because towards the end, the Trill is transferred to a female body, and the relationship doesn't survive this transfer because Dr. Crusher doesn't love the new host. And so there's a very poignant breakup scene at the end. And I thought that this was like, you know, really the whole point of the tale was to sort of show this breakup scene. It's like, why are you doing this if not to give this, some sort of, resolution here? And the resolution was that, Dr. Crusher was confronted by, what she thought was, what he thought I'm not sure what she thought was her lover, and Dr. Crusher said no. And explained to her that I just can't handle you, having one body one day and a different body the next day. When will it end? And she said, perhaps someday our ability to love won't be so limited. I thought that was so poignant. That was such a important thought to take with us, because it was the very last thing that she said. It was with that, the Trill got up and left. And I just thought it was so important that we thought about that, like, why is our ability to love so limited?
Thank you for that. Yeah, this just blew my mind because I kind of knew what the ending was. But what I didn't know or remember until I was watching it was that in between the symbiote, the being that was Odin, that that Beverly was in love with, that would then get transferred into a Trill body. While they were waiting for this new host to come, the Trill body had to be put into a human body, which wouldn't have lived for more than a couple of days, or I think it was a day or two. And that symbiote was put into Riker's body, and so we see this really odd situation where Beverly, who knows Riker, but also knows Riker has been taken over by this symbiote, she has to deal with the being in love with what's inside Riker, but still looking at this person who she knows and feels is sort of brotherly. And I even brought up this this whole episode with my husband because I kept wondering if the female host had been the first replacement body, if that would have changed anything. Because I just kind of thought that this whole having to get over the transfer to Riker thing was a hitch in the giddy up, if you will, because I know I would have a difficult time with the person, let's say the symbiote. I loved being transferred into the body of someone I already knew, and for me, I thought I would have an easier time having it transferred into the body of a female Trill than a human man that I knew, even though I feel that I'm a heterosexual person. But if you're already in love, you're just already in love. And so I just wondered about that. So I'll just do a quick reset here. This is the Star Trek Sundays room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse. We're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And the topic we're discussing right now is from the episode The Host. So I'll go to Sean to see if, Sean, you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's been a while since I saw that episode. I think that depending on one's sexual preferences, the the outward appearance of the person comes into play when one falls in love with someone. So if you know, so if you're heterosexual and you're not heteroflexible, you're definitely heterosexual, then you might have a problem with the trill suddenly uh, coming into a host body that is your same sex. Um, if you're not, then that would be no problem at all. So this whole thing about falling in love, and love is a very complicated human experience that is, based on hormones, but also on a lot of other things. And it can be quite complicated, as we all know. And but I think one's sexual orientation that they're predisposed to have affects whether the outside appearance is important or not in some cases, and for some it's not important at all. If you're bisexual or pansexual, whatever, then it doesn't really matter to you. You can fall in love with someone regardless of the outside appearance. So that's all I got to say on that matter. And as far as the episode, you mentioned Three's Company. I think John Ritter played, I think, the character of Jack. I think he was not playing a gay character. He was playing a straight character that was pretending to be gay so that the Ropers, the people that owned the apartment, would not find any fault with the guy being with two girls in the same sharing the same apartment at the time. So, and he did a great job, and I'm sad that he's no longer with us. But, and on that, I'll land.
Thank you, Sean. I was so excited to get to everybody's opinion that I actually forgot to ask T what he thought. He gave us such a good summary. So, and I agree that we have these preferences or leanings, I guess. It is interesting though, because if we think our spouse now, if they were damaged, but instead of dying, they could be their being, their everything we love about them, except their body could be put into somebody else's body. How would that affect us? And so I want to ask you, T, if you had a relationship with a host, would it survive a transfer?
I don't think so. I can't imagine the same mannerisms coming from a different person. Like, if my girlfriend went into this, 6'2" big burly guy, that wouldn't work for me. And it's just, yeah, I know that that's superficial, and I know that that's, something that's shallow about me. And yet I don't know how to say otherwise. It's just something that is like inbuilt into me. And so I don't know. I struggle with that. I know that if that were the case, the relationship would not survive. And I don't know quite what to do with that about myself.
Yeah, thank you for your honesty. Yeah, I've thought about this myself, not in the context of this show, but I have an acquaintance whose husband transitioned into her wife. And not only did their relationship survive, but it thrived because my friend's spouse is now really happy. And I think, what would happen if my husband, who's 6'2", wanted to transition into a woman? Would that survive? And I have to say I lean towards I don't think it would survive, but I don't know, because I wonder about this other couple, and what my friend would have answered. Perhaps she would have answered many years ago, no, it wouldn't have survived. But love is love, right? And when your choice is this love or not this love, maybe there's ways around it. I don't know, but I thank you for your honesty as well. So this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens, and we're discussing the episode The Host. where Dr. Crusher falls in love with a male who becomes a female through a host transfer, and the relationship doesn't survive. So, Joshua, if you had a relationship with a host, would it survive a transfer? He might be having trouble with his mute button again. Well, I'll ask that question to Steve, and we can get back to Joshua. Steve, if you had a relationship with a host and it needed to change its body, would it survive the transfer?
Let me see. I mean, obviously, it always depends on a lot of details, but like for me, um, there's a lot of so it's really more of a cultural thing in the first place that we even have relationships as we have them, right? In fact, there's a lot to be said that by the very fact that so many people cheat in their relationships, it doesn't make sense to say that human nature is 100% monogamous, And then you look at the biological function, the whole point in why we have this desire in the first place to form in these relationships or to form in just sexual intercourse in the first place. It is to procreate. That's why it's been naturally selected for. And none of us is biologically beholden to none of us is beholden to do what our biology has fashioned as a strategy for our procreation. So for me, the relationships that I hold are really much more about friendships than they are about sex. I think I think it doesn't make sense to say oh, this is all over and we can't live together, we can't be like family with one another because sex is out of the picture now, right? It just doesn't seem like that's the whole point of why I'm together with my wife. I mean, in a sense, it kind of is because I want to have kids, right? But if that's even off the table, we'd adopt, and I'd find other ways to take care of my biological need to at least convince my body that I'm trying to procreate, right? I just I don't see how that really needs to change the fact that family is family, especially when you choose for that person to be your family.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's it's a lot to think about. I guess when we think about our sexuality, it's a small part of why we're with people in general, especially if we're with people for a long, long time. But when it's active, it's a real strong part. It's the only thing, right? So, so it is a lot to think about, and I wonder if it changes as we get older, right? If my thoughts on things might change as I get older and I'm out of reproduction age, right? And how I feel about my lifestyle and what I want from life. Because when I was younger, a lot of those urges were probably more impactful and decision making than I wanted them to be. But let's go back to Joshua. He said that he could share now. So Joshua, when discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens, if you had a relationship with a host, would it survive a transfer?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. The kind of expanded thing, and I'm kind of actually going to cite Star Trek lore to kind of give an example. So I don't want to ruin at what point is a spoiler warning not necessary? This is for DS9, and I'll speak.
No spoiler. Yeah, no. I'm saying no spoiler warning is necessary.
Okay.
They're all really old. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
So for those of you who are familiar with DS9, Dr. Bashir was wildly attracted to Jadzia Dax, also a Trill and a host. Eventually, she ended up marrying Worf, but then Jadzia died. Dax, the symbiote, survived, and eventually, um, there was this story arc where I can't remember the name of Dax's new host, but it was a weird thing, right? A very awkward thing because she was still on DS9 as the station counselor, and Worf was there, and it was different, and he had to deal with his own beliefs on the afterlife of Klingon afterlife and all that stuff. And then she also, the new host or the new pair, for lack of a better way to describe it, ended up developing a relationship with Dr. Bashir, if I recall. Now, when you have all of that together, it's a merging, specifically relevant to a host. And that kind of situation, there are a lot of factors involved. And similarly, if I was with someone who had a host, right? Like, it's not just the aesthetics relevant to their physical appearance and to the kind of the way you would interact. Um, I don't, and I would, without getting too much into my interpersonal things, just because somebody is bisexual or pansexual, I can't speak to the former, but to the first, that doesn't mean that gender or gender normative appearance things don't matter. So I think that's a misnomer. But relevant to the thing, it just really is a nuanced thing. And so for me, it wouldn't be the same relationship, but it would be a different relationship. And I would have to negotiate that new relationship as a new possible scenario, regardless of what the gender was of the host. That my how that would play out.
Oh, thank you, Joshua. T, did you have any response to that?
Yeah, I think that was just a fantastic share. It really got me thinking what you were saying. It's not necessarily like, the sexual parts, it's the package. Like, I could not find myself snuggling up to a Klingon. They're just too thorny. That they have too many bumps and hard places and everything, and it's that gruffness that I can't see myself doing, because it isn't the sex as such as just the physical relationship. The physical relationship is part of the relationship that we have. The holding each other, the holding hands, the being close to each other, that type of thing. And so, it's one of those things where that's part of the package. And when you take away that part of the relationship, you necessarily change the relationship. So even if you go into a different host and it's a female, it's just another female human, I still feel like I would have to fall in love again. I still feel like I'd have to, you know, become, become not just accustomed to, but enamored with the anatomy, and that part of the relationship would change. And I think I love some anatomy more than I love Klingon anatomy, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. You got me thinking, because I think as we go through life and we have different relationships, something to consider in this, or contemplate in this, is when we've had different lovers or relationships, the next person that you have, even if they're of the same gender, they touch differently, they feel differently, they hold you differently. And it is getting to know that, even if it is the same gender. So it's always different. There might be some commonalities, but yeah, it, it, hmm. It's just a lot to think about, and I think out loud. So we'll move on with this, because we've got Stuart and Carl's come up to the stage. So this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And the episode we're discussing right now is The Host. Dr. Crusher falls in love with a male who becomes a female through host transfer, and the relationship doesn't survive. So, Stu, if you had a relationship with a host, would it survive a transfer?
Would I survive the host transfer, do you think?
No, if you had a relationship with a host, would your relationship survive a transfer to a new host?
Oh, yes, sorry. I think it would take a long time because, as I said before, part of our human, one of the main things our brains developed is an ability to recognize faces. It's inherent in one of the human things about how we immediately recognize people. So if that, the first problem is if it was another human being, you'd have to get used to a completely new face. Some people just wouldn't be able to accept it. Their brains would just reject it. They couldn't accept that this person was that person. It would take years, maybe years, because there are mannerisms, and it's at the end of the day. Sometimes I think that's what the episode was talking about. Is it just the physical appearance, or is it the idiosyncrasies, whatever that word is, that we take for granted with our partners that remember? Because when you're remembering your partners, you do remember the face and that, but you also remember experiences that you shared with them, the funny moments or really funny shit that they said or did, or things that you really cherish. So I think you could, but it would have to at least be, you couldn't be if it was a different species, because if, say, like you're saying with Klingons, I suppose that's one thing, but even if it was just like a, let's say you went from a bipedal to some hexapod with a really weird shaped head, that would be even more strange. So I think if you were willing to give it a chance, I don't think you'd be like, I think because the problem with that character, he immediately started trying advancing on her. And there's a few plot holes. We'll reject those. Like, why didn't they know the Trill was symbiotic in the first place? But we'll forget that for now. But yeah, I think if he didn't maybe try and advance so fast and basically help her come to terms with it, maybe she might have given it a chance. But unfortunately, her job probably would have not permitted that, because then she would have had to say, "Well, I can either," because it was a quick romance. Do we know if she knew him for a long time, or it was just a fling that they'd started up? Does anybody remember? That's one thing I can't remember from this one.
On the mission to do the negotiations.
Oh, so it's just a fling.
So
Oh, well, no. I think it would be different. If it was a very long-term relationship, then yes, because you wouldn't want to lose that. But a fling, no. I don't think so, because it was obviously maybe and then you got to ask, is it infatuation more than actual attraction, like immediate infatuation? And then you got to think, whereas firstly, if you were in a relationship with someone, I don't think it depends on the symbiont. I think if you could come to terms to accept that, then you might be willing to give them a few years to adjust to the new body, but not if it was just someone you met from a one night stand. No, you just be like, okay, bye.
I love the way you cut yourself off like you were like out the door before you finished.
Well, it's like, yeah,
saying
it was
goodbye.
Thank you for the great time. Thank you for the wonderful night we had
Bye.
together. But see you later.
Yeah. I think those are really good points, Stu. Yeah, it was a fling, and with flings, you're initially attracted to the body. You get to know the person, and they might make you feel really good and warm and all of that. But usually, there's a sexual attraction that is stronger than what Steve had been referring to, which was the friendship of it. You don't really get to build a friendship just over 10 days, I would say. That was a really good share. T, did you have any comments before we move on to Carl?
no, I think we should move
on. Okay, thank you.
Experiences,
the
things that made us laugh, the good time, bad times. We miss living with them. Oh, sorry, my mic's still on. It's just
that's okay, Stuart.
I think out loud sometimes,
we want to
and
know
my
what
mic is still on, and I get caught in the act. Sorry.
That could have been dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. It's all right. It's all right. So we're talking about the host episode, and Carl, if you had a relationship with a host, do you think the relationship would survive a transfer?
Yeah, it probably wouldn't. And I think that overall, the kinds of things that we love can change, but when the thing that we love changes, that's when it becomes problematic because it's the totality of what you of that thing is what made you love it to begin with. And so it has to be an all or nothing. It doesn't mean that you couldn't love something else. It just means that the reason that you loved that thing has changed and now it's no longer that thing.
Right, right. Hmm. Uh, Thank you for that. No, I appreciate it. Um, we are at 11:15, and we still have a couple of episodes, but do you think we have time to talk about The Outcast?
I think we should do the Outcast really fast for sure.
Okay, great. Um, so this is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And the next episode we're going to discuss is The Outcast. Did you want to give a summary of what happened in The Outcast?
Yeah, definitely. The Outcast, season 5, episode 17, aired March 16th, 1992. So we're still progressing in time here. Riker falls in love with Soren, a member of an androgynous race known as the Janai, who dares to be female. In choosing this, she breaks her cultural norms and they force her into reprogramming so she will be normal again. I chose this episode because it highlights a race where androgyny is the norm and Soren is forced to not be female. So I think they really pack this episode full of gender issues. There's a card game in which Worf goes, somebody's. I think Troy specifies a bunch of wild cards for the poker game, and Worf goes, "This is a woman's game," and Dr. Crusher pipes up, "Why? Because women are weak." And a great discussion about the strengths of women ensues, right? And Soren had some amazing quotes like, I've known I was different all my life," or towards the end in her trial, she gave the most compelling speech I've heard in a Star Trek in a while. She said, "I am female. I was born that way. I had those feelings. I've had those feelings, those longings all of my life. It's not unnatural. I'm not sick because I feel this way. I do not need to be helped. I do not need to be cured. What I need, and what all of those who are like me need, is your understanding and your compassion. We have not injured you in any way, and yet we are scorned and attacked, all because we are different. What we do is no different from what you do." And then after that, they use psychotectic therapy to reprogram her to not be female anymore in her head. And I felt that this was one of those things where, we had not yet really, demonified the whole reprogramming gays to not be gay quite yet. It was still one of those things where people that was sort of going around at the time, and Star Trek dared to speak up and have a real voice about this, and I thought it was very brave for it to do that, and I thought it was a great episode that really gave a voice to people who dare to be who they are.
Yeah, thank you for that summary. I loved this episode, and I know we're at 11:18. Maybe we can go a little bit longer today if you've got time, because there might be a few more bits of discussion. Um, oh, did you, Mike? I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I said, yeah, totally, definitely.
Okay, good. Yeah, I love this episode. I thought the actress who played Soren was amazing. The writing was amazing. If people have not seen this recently, it it was amazing, and I got feels through the whole thing. Um, so I mean, Soren paid a heavy price to dare to be female. So I ask you, T, and then I'll ask the rest of the stage. Were the doctors correcting a genetic abnormality, like curing a genetic disease for the Janai, or simply taking away her individuality and using genetics to justify their actions?
That's a tough question, Victoria. Um, I don't really have a good answer to that because, on one hand, of course, they were taking away her individuality. I think that's unquestionable. But from their perspective, I think that they saw it no different than them correcting a heart condition that's genetic or some other condition that is impacting their way of life. Now, they were wrong in doing so, but that's the justification that they use. So I guess ultimately they were taking away her individuality and justifying it using genetics, because in the difference being here is one of consent. When people go to get a heart surgery to correct their genetic defect, they're consenting to that. But Soren didn't consent. Instead, she chose to be different. She chose to be verbal about who she was, and they forced her into the decision. And I think that's the real difference here, is that they were using genetics to justify their decision to force her into something that was not of her consent.
Thank you. Welcome to the stage, Bishop. We're just going in PTR order about the topic, and then we'll do a little bit of a popcorn style discussion afterwards if we've got some time. Sean, what are your thoughts on this episode?
Well, I think the question can't be answered because their genetics are obviously different from human genetics. So, but the point was that her freedom to choose was being taken away, and you could see some correlation to abortion today with one's body. And so, although they might have thought that she had a genetic malfunction or inadequacy, if she was willing to live with it, including the osternation, or I'm not saying that correct, including all of the societal consequences of choosing to be different from the rest of the society, it's like, well, why wasn't she allowed to do that? And what was the danger to the society to accept that someone may want to be different than the rest of them, which were androgynous? So, there's several questions there. Personal freedom, and is the society challenged in some way by one person that's not the same as the rest of society? And we experience that the same today in human society. If someone wants to be trans or feels that they were born with the wrong gender identification at birth, or they have sexual orientation towards the same sex, um, they are a minority. And if they're willing to live with that, why would society be challenged with this minority that has a different sexual opinion? And don't they have the freedom to choose? And the same thing with abortion. It's your body. The fetus is inside your body, and depending on your body, um, do you have the freedom to choose on that also? Or can the state come in and force a decision that's different than what your choice is? These are questions that American society today are important to consider and to think about going forward. Some people's religious beliefs would influence highly these questions. And I think that can be a difficult situation when that happens. But this episode did bring up a lot of good things to think about regarding gender and personal freedoms.
Wow, thank you for that. Both T and Sean bring up consent, which I hadn't even had in my notes. So I really appreciate that. And Sean, bringing up the abortion issue, I don't want that to derail this one, but I'm going to make a note of that because I'm quite sure that somewhere in Star Trek lore, there's been some storyline that has discussed that or alluded to that kind of consent or freedom somewhere. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. T, did you have a response to Sean before we move on to Joshua?
Yeah, I thought that his abortion parallel was absolutely perfect and right in line with the very type of thing that they were trying to drive at, which is consent regarding medical issues. And I think that you know it is unfortunate that I also did not put consent in my notes, and I had to think about that, in the moment, and realize, yes, that is what's going wrong here. Is she's not consenting, and so I think it's interesting that we sort of arrive at the same parallels there. So I really wanted to thank you for that share.
Thank you. So this is Star Trek Sundays, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. We're discussing the episode The Outcast, where Soren paid a heavy price to dare to be female in a world or a species of genderless persons. So, Joshua, were the doctors correcting a genetic abnormality, like curing a genetic disease, or simply taking away her individuality and using genetics to justify their actions?
Yes. I think this episode is not an easy one to answer. Now, granted, I haven't watched it for some time. I didn't pre-watch before the discussion, but I do think that on the one hand, we're obviously watching science fiction, and I don't know if it was Steve or somebody else, maybe it was Stu, that said we are inevitably going to anthropomorphize species and cultures, and we're going to have our biases. And it was obviously she was not happy about it, at least in my recollection. But I'm not sure. And I think the problem is that from a human perspective, obviously it makes sense that would be, we would say, that that's wrong and everything else. I wonder though, when you're actually kind of unpacking something, sometimes we do things that we think are good, and we believe them strongly to be good and healthy, and we don't learn till generations later the harm that we've caused. So I don't think it's an easy answer for this particular episode, but I'm glad that they made it because it forced people to think about it. That's about all I have to say on this one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is a Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing gender in a galaxy full of aliens. And we're discussing the episode Outcast. So, Stu, I'm going to pass it to you. Were the doctors correcting a genetic abnormality, like curing a disease in Soren, when they put her through this psychokinetic, it's conversion therapy, or were they simply taking away her individuality and using genetics to justify their actions? So you can answer that question or make a comment generally on it.
Yeah, this is the part where, because I joined the STS list late, so I didn't get to watch this episode, but it's definitely on my bucket list. Looking at the wiki page, I can see Riker is doing his man thing with getting on his, oh, well, you haven't experienced. Yeah, he's trying to get on his charms to Soren. I thought, yeah, that's typical Riker. But one thing I can relate to is there's an Orville, which is the Orville, which is Seth MacFarlane's comedy and homage to Star Trek. The first season has a similar episode that is about gender conformity. So yeah, you might know the one I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the Orville sometime, I strongly recommend it. It is hilarious, but it also has very topical issues. And there's one that is based about the gender identity and a race that is basically a child is born and she's being forced to change her identity based on the culture, and the the crew, who is very liberal. They're part of the liberal sort of get stuck between, is it our right to, as people who are pushing liberty, to tell these people what do they do, because these people were members of the crew. One of them was a member of the crew. Or do we have to respect their culture and say, well, this is what these people do culturally? They force gender change, and so they're caught in that dilemma. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, if you look at things like insects, how insects like seem to have like castes and genders, but they're much more simple beasts. And sometimes I wonder, in a science fiction setting, if insects evolved, would they still have that same sort of caste? Like, you're a male, so this is what you do, and that's all you do. Yeah. But yeah, I'd recommend checking that out. I really couldn't answer for Soren, but I'll definitely check out that episode and maybe have a think about it.
Thank you. T, any comments on what we've heard in the last little while?
Something that came to mind was when Stuart mentioned that Riker was doing his Riker thing. I have a note in my list of topics here, and it says, do a topic on misogyny in a utopia, and then my notes for what episodes to bring up is every episode with Riker and Troy in it. Right? Because Riker's just basically awful to Troy constantly. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, he's almost like the chauvinistic, but everyone seems to act like it's totally okay. And it's like, kind of like, even the stuff he does today, people would go, wow.
He's a great director.
Yeah, Jonathan Frakes is an amazing director. I don't like his womanizing character.
Yeah.
I never liked that about
him. That just sounds like great acting, because I think that's the point.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be caricatures.
They were originally
of
going to
that
put
look.
Riker in as, like, there were some questionable. They didn't know if Picard would make it, and they kind of did the whole thing so that he could be the new Captain Kirk, I think, is what they originally intended when they rebooted the series.
It does come over as a Captain Kirk now you say that, Joshua. Wow.
Well, no, I mean, that's actually specifically, if you go back and you look at the thought process
cool.
when they were
Yep.
building
Gene
these,
Roddenberry
they specifically were
went
going
against
to
him,
drop
yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
Gene
Maybe T, you can speak to that.
Okay, you guys. I want to have a popcorn style in just a minute, but Io has been on stage for a bit, so I just want to let him do his share. You can share about what you think about the Outcast and the question we've asked about where the doctor's correcting a genetic abnormality. And if you want to touch on what you've put in the chat, you can do that as well. So we'll let Io have the stage for a few minutes, and then we'll get to just sort of a popcorn conversation bit for a few minutes before we close out.
Okay, cool, thanks. I'll try to be brief. Without knowing too much about the medical details or genetics of that species, it would be hard. Although the idea of a choice, freedom of choice, freedom to choose to be different, I think is central in human individuality, or what is it called, when you like transcend or become a person, your own person. We take that very seriously, at least here in the West, and I think that kind of ideal risks falling to the wayside in a galaxy, because I don't think it's easy to maintain. So I think in another culture, to cast our expectations and so on would be wrong, but I think the species is wrong for not allowing the choice. Even if you're dying here and there's a surgery that could save you, you can still opt out of the surgery. Although there are exceptions where we want to make sure you're mentally fit, but that's more for your benefit, so that you aren't prematurely or inaccurately making a decision. So I think they were focusing on genetics, but they were missing the morality tale, that species, and that kind of was a reflection of how we were failing to do that in the 90s. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I know that in the episode they actually said that, and I think it was Soren who said that they had evolved to be genderless, and that was actually a benefit to their species. So that may obviously inform why they would want to make everybody that way, because if now you've got people identifying as female and male and being attracted to, Soren as a female being attracted to a Janai who's a male and taking on those roles, if they reproduce in those old-fashioned ways, then maybe they will devolve in their own species and in their minds, because they think that they've evolved to something higher by not having these genders. T, did you have any response to anything?
Yeah, there was definitely a discussion from Soren about the way that their society had evolved, and there was also a scene where she was, sitting with Riker, and was very curious about the way these gender situations worked, and she inquired about, two lovers sitting at a table touching each other and all of that. And she mentioned a couple of things like that they choose to sleep with each other, not for mating, but just to keep each other warm for the comfort of another person. So I think that there was definitely a lot of discussion around how this situation came about for her and why it was different, and the psychotectic reprogramming, I thought, sounded barbaric, and I think the outcome of it was certainly shocking enough to leave me, very horrified. But I think this was a great discussion about this episode, and just want to thank everybody who contributed to it, because it was right on the money.
Thank you. Yeah, this was our second episode, our second show of Star Trek Sundays, and we plan to do this every Sunday at 10 a.m. And as I said, the link tree in our in the room here does have episodes. If you just want to bookmark that, it'll always be updated, so you'll be ahead of the game. Because if we plan, even 2 or 3 weeks out, you'll have the opportunity to see what T is curating, and then of course we'll have some sort of schedule when we talk, like we did this time. We had these in a particular order for a particular reason, because they built on each other. T, did you want to take just a moment to talk about what next week is going to bring?
Absolutely, I'd be excited to. Next week we are doing the Kobayashi Maru scenario, which is a simulation scenario in which a captain is challenged in a way that the answer to the solution is not obvious. And there's a number. When I went to first look this up, I thought it was just the original scenario that happened in the Wrath of Khan with Kirk hacking it, but that wasn't the case. The Kobayashi Maru actually appeared several times throughout multiple series, and each time it was a little bit different. And I think discussing sort of like, the questions that get asked when a no-win situation occurs, and the sacrifices that get made in order for leadership to occur effectively, is going to make a particularly good topic of discussion. At least I hope it will. After that, the week after, on 8/28, we are doing psychological warfare, which we're going to start with one of my absolute favorite episodes. And if I just say, there are 4 lights, everybody's going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Followed by Future and Perfect, in which Riker is in a simulation and can't escape from it. And I'm still working on other episodes for psychological warfare. But I do hope that you will do a little bit of watching beforehand, and I'll try and give you, try and build out that link tree a little bit more, so that you have even more warning as to what we're going to do in the future. But I hope that this is enough watching for the next week or so here, and really look forward to discussing the Kobayashi Maru next week.
Thank you, T, and thank you to everybody who participated. I know that there are people who were on stage and participated and then had to leave, and others who were on stage, participated as they could, and then went to the audience. So I really appreciate everybody being here. By all means, you can back channel T or me. Let us know what you think and what your suggestions are. Well, I'm going to close out the room. T, did you have any final thoughts?
I'm super excited. This discussion went even better than I could have imagined. You guys are awesome. Everybody who shared. Victoria is amazing. I am super excited about the Kobayashi Maru next week. I do hope that you will do, a little bit of watching. Even if you don't watch the whole Wrath of Khan, you can get the Kobayashi Maru in the first like 15 or 20 minutes or so. It's at the beginning of the movie, so you can just watch the first 15 minutes and pick that up, and then move on to the rest of the other parts there. Of course, the Wrath of Khan happens to be my personal favorite of all of them. And so if you do want a good movie with an amazing ending, I won't do any spoilers on that. But after that, psychological warfare, and again, I'm going to work on more episodes for that. So look for the link tree to get filled up with that, as well as future episodes of Star Trek Sundays. Thank you to Victoria. We're going to be on here in Clubhouse every Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And hopefully, we're going to get a YouTube channel going here in just a little bit. Going to start streaming to other places. And I'm really excited about that. So, looking forward to doing all of those things and hope to see you all in the hallways.
Thank you, T, and thank you for your your talent and your time in curating these, because this has just been and your summaries today were spot on. So I do really appreciate it. We will try to keep them to 90 minutes. Sometimes they go over, but we wanted to be able to leave room for that. So I am going to leave the room open for another 30 seconds or so that people can save the link tree, and then I'll close the room, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you next Sunday. So have a great day.